Hello and welcome to the Cheeky Science Show. In this video, I'll provide an introduction to the gut microbiome because I think in the next couple of videos I'm going to focus a little bit on this because there's some really interesting research in this area. So the aim of this video then is just to provide a general overview as to what is the gut microbiome and then why you should care. So you'll learn about how the microbiome can fluctuate by a variety of different factors. And then we'll also take a little look at some companies that offer services to look at your gut microbiome. So firstly then, what is the gut microbiome? Well, here comes the scary fact. We are not alone in our bodies. In fact, we are also containing trillions of microorganisms. So this doesn't just include bacteria, but it also includes viruses and fungi as well. And so collectively, this is referred to as the microbiome. However, most of the current research is more focused on the bacterial species, so I'll kind of focus on that as well. And there are hundreds of distinct bacterial species within the gut. And so they can be good and bad, so some of them are beneficial, but some of them are pathogenic. And understanding the differences between them is what's really interesting. And so these microbes then, they're not just passengers within the body. They also play active roles in a variety of different processes and are actually more like team players within our bodies. And so there's evidence now that links the microbiome to metabolism, also to immunity, and there's also some evidence about it related to neuronal development as well. So it's a really interesting topic. And so related to this, obviously defects in metabolism, immunity, and neuronal development are also linked to disease. And so the microbiome is also related to disease, and there's now lots of evidence linking the microbiome composition to diseases such as Alzheimer's, autism, depression, autoimmune diseases such as multiple sclerosis, and also cancer. And so I'm currently planning to go into a little bit more detail into these different associations within the next upcoming videos. So yeah, look forward to that. And so that the way that we treat disease through drugs and medicines is also tightly associated with the microbiome because they can also influence the metabolism of those drugs and affect how those drugs are acting on your body. But on the flip side, as we'll come to near the end of the video, we could also potentially use this understanding of the microbiome to target the microbiome itself as a therapeutic. And so we've now looked at what the gut microbiome is, and the key point to take away is that the gut microbiome isn't like our genetics where it's fixed. Our gut microbiome is very dynamic and the composition can change. And so, as I've already mentioned, there are a variety of different factors that can influence the composition of your gut microbiome. So this includes things like your age, possibly your sex, definitely your diet, and also your geographical location. And you can even artificially alter your microbiome through transplants. I mean, not personally, couldn't just do that. I mean, like, there's research into this, and they've done it in, like, rats and mice. So how does your microbiome change as you age? Well, I came across a really good graph that I found in a recent Nature review paper, and so I'll put the link for that paper in the description, and I'll try and recapitulate it here. So if we track the relative abundance of some arbitrary bacterial species that you don't need to worry about at the moment, and look at their relative abundance for our age, we can see that it's altering. So what happens then as we age? So if we first look at infancy, what happens during infancy is that during breastfeeding, there's human milk oligosaccharides, and they participate in the maturation of the microbiota in this early stage of life. And then as in infancy you progress to eating solid foods, that's also followed by an increase in bacterial richness. So then if we look at adulthood, we can see that generally it seems pretty stable, but then there's these fluctuations that occur on a daily scale. So obviously the circadian rhythm and your feeding fasting cycles will also have short-term influences on the microbiome composition, and also what you're eating is very important. So for example, if you have, let's say, a high protein diet, you will see a bias in the composition towards a certain population of bacterial species that favour that diet. And so what the healthy diet for you is thought now to be closely linked to your microbiome composition. And given that the microbiome influences metabolism, influences immunity and neuronal development, can you target your diet to, optimize your microbiome and optimize your health? And well, I need to look more into this myself, but I think the general consensus is that the more diverse your microbiome is, the better. But I'm going to look into this and we'll cover this in way more detail in the next couple of videos. And then when you look at late life, from current observations, there appears to be a decline in the richness of the microbiome, and that's generally thought to be associated with a reduced food diversity at this stage of life. And so again, is there ways that you could increase this diversity to prevent aging, to optimize the health of the older population? Okay, so now let's delve into a bit deeper into the diet and the saying, you are what you eat, which I remember hearing as a kid and thinking was quite funny, but there's a lot of truth in it. And what you eat definitely does influence your microbiome composition. And so we already know that moving to solid food in infancy increases the richness. And also we know that there's a lot of evidence that dietary fibre is like the food for the microbiome. And so when it's fermented by the microbiome, one of the products are these short-chain fatty acids. And the interesting evidence is that's been linked with the activity levels of T cells, which are linked to your immunity, and goes back to my initial point of how the microbiome and its byproducts are so associated with disease states, and let food be thy medicine is kind of like the best quote to represent our current understanding of the microbiome with disease. And a good study that kind of illustrates my point is this Cell, Host and Microbe paper that I discussed previously, that looked at how the diet strongly affects the gut microbiome composition, and in particular how that affects the barrier between the colon and human cells, which is the barrier that separates the gut microbiome from ourselves. And so mice that were on a Western style diet had increased permeability of this barrier, which is bad, and it could increase inflammation in the body. Whereas when they prevented this by transplanting a specific type of microbiota, they kind of reversed this permeability, and that is a good thing. But that's not confirmed in humans yet. And just to mention another study briefly, there was a study that looked at how partly the effects of taking metformin as a treatment for type 2 diabetes is also partially mediated by the gut microbiota. And so what they did in this study, which I'll link down below in the description, is they assessed the stool sample of 22 patients that had type 2 diabetes, and they had been on metformin for 3 days. And even within that short timescale, they saw changes in the composition of the microbiota. And in particular, they saw a decrease in this bacterial species and an increase in the levels of bile acids. So given that composition is so important, how can you actually assess your own microbiome composition? Well, I've been doing some research, and there's quite a few companies that seem to offer personalised testing of your microbiome, and then they provide feedback onto what specific foods you should and shouldn't eat. And so one I came across was Biome. And so what you do is you order one of their kits, and then you provide them with a pea-sized sample of your stool, and you send it back to the lab. They then, using transcriptomics, so looking at the RNA in your stool sample, and then combining that with artificial intelligence, they come up with a plan of the diet and the foods that you should and shouldn't avoid. And according to their website, it's the only company currently able to identify and quantify the gut microbiota to examine what these live organisms are producing and present personalised diet and nutrition advice. So, I don't know how good these companies are at the moment. I wouldn't trust them yet. One, because there's still so much research to go and to understand, and also, especially with the artificial intelligence, those kind of softwares will improve as you get more data. But there are other companies as well that are offering the same thing, not just Biome. So there's uBiome, Day2, and Atlas Biomed. And so I reckon as well there's probably going to be even more companies that start offering these kind of services. But yeah, as I said, none of them can provide a complete picture of your microbiome. It's way too complicated to be able to do that. But I guess I think it's cool that there are companies that are offering stuff like this, because I think it is really interesting to have this kind of information. So, on the flip side, there are also quite a few research companies that are doing research into the microbiome itself and how they can be used for drug treatments. So, one is Pure Tech Health, and they are answering the questions: what if we could treat immune and infectious disease by mimicking the way in which the gut microbiota maintains a healthy immune system in humans? So, that's, can we target the microbiome to benefit and treat diseases? So, as I said, this has just been a brief intro to what is the microbiome and why it is important to understand it. But I think there's, a lot of excitement in this area, and there's a lot of really interesting research to come from it. So I think the gut microbiome is very cool. So as always, thanks for listening.